exit to Rohit. All right, you'll start this in another minute, correct? All right, we should see that. Oh, yeah. Hey everyone, thank you for joining. I am very glad to have Al Qasim with us. Al brings a really unique perspective. He's one of those few people who have worked at the mothership at Salesforce and then also at a Salesforce customer implementing AI. So I'm very curious to hear from someone who's been on both sides of the fence. I'll turn it over to you, to Al, to introduce yourself and maybe give our viewers a little bit of background to what you've been at.
Hey, yeah, Saurabh. Thanks for having me join today. I've been watching some of these events that you've been hosting, and it's the discussions have been really impactful and relevant to what companies are discussing today. So just to give a little bit of a background of myself, for the past 18 years, I've been consulting with enterprise customers, supporting their business needs and matching it to technology to support them along their journeys. More recently, I was the director of product strategy for the go-to-market experience team at Indeed, as well as the director or the directly responsible individual for Agentforce implementation there. And prior to that, I was a director of technical consulting with Salesforce Professional Services.
That's great. So, since you bring that very unique insight, and I'm very curious to hear if you can talk a little bit about, from a Salesforce customer's perspective about using AI with Salesforce. What are some of the compelling business cases? What were some of the challenges? The pre-tech, pre-implementation, part of the story.
Yeah, so I think where every organization needs to start and where we started is kind of identifying where you are in your AI maturity level. Are you at just the beginning trying to understand it, dip your toe into it? Are you more advanced and looking to incorporate it as part of your business workflows and enhance processes? Or are you more of that more transformational where you want AI embedded into that flow? And the reason I mention this is because that will indicate the types of use cases that you should be targeting, right? So if you're, for instance, if you're a little bit risk adverse and don't want to rely on AI to make critical decisions, then you're probably not in that transformational bucket yet. However, you may be in that more advanced bucket where it's incorporating a human in the loop. Yeah, sorry.
That's very interesting. So, like, what you're almost saying that there is sort of an early phase which could just be I'm doing some automation with AI and probably crunching through unstructured data, analyzing files, doing something with case categorization, things like that. And
Yeah.
then there's sort of a more transformational aspect of it where you tend to get more agentic and AI is actually making decisions. Is that kind of the direction you're?
Yes, similar, right? And then there's that piece where you incorporate AI as part of the workflow, right? So what I mean by that is if you think about like an SDR agent, right? Salesforce recently announced that they've been able to engage all these unnurtured leads that they had in their backlog. But when you join an event, when I joined a live event, I asked them, I'm like, is the SDR just nurturing it and then qualifying it as a sales qualified lead before converting it into opportunity? Or are you handing it off to an SDR rep? And the response was that they're handing it off to an SDR rep to do that final qualification. So that's where I mean the advanced aspect comes into play versus transformational, where from an advanced aspect, you can incorporate it as part of your workflow to further nurture that lead, for instance, give it a higher score. So your SDR teams and BDR teams are engaging with higher qualified leads with individuals who are interacting. Not only that, it also helps to prep the conversation so that the customer is not necessarily coming in blind about the product or service your company is offering. They can ask some of those high level questions that the SDR agent is able to respond to. and then get more detailed with your actual human rep.
That's a very interesting point. So, um, if you think about that, it's almost, a very classic human in the loop, at least for a period of time.
Yeah.
And once the organization feels more comfortable with the whole idea, then you may have a transition where you may take a substantial portion of those activities and hand it over to AI to kind of autonomously drive. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah, I would say so. So I think it's a multi-stage process, right? So initially, when leveraging an SDR agent, I classify human in the loop as two different definitions. So one is a human reviewing the output before it gets sent out to an external customer in this case, right? So am I reviewing the composed email the SDR agent is going to be sending out and editing it before it gets sent? So that's one version of human in the loop. The second version of human in the loop comes in when that lead is qualified. So the human is not reviewing the SDR emails before they get sent out. And I think that's a real benefit of where generative AI and agentic AI comes into play, where your SDR rep can now be operating 24/7. So especially with like SMB customers and those customers who are entrepreneurs, they don't work a normal 9 to 5 lifestyle. So they may be engaging after 5 p.m. when your reps are home, but your SDR agent can continue to nurture, right? So that enables you to then have trust in the SDR agent that it's engaging and sending out the right messaging in order to make and schedule that meaningful connection and that meeting with your SDR rep in the future, right? So that's one way where that's the advanced portion of it, where you trust it to engage. And then the transformational aspect in my head is that SDR agent, the human agent, sorry, or SDR rep, sorry, agents become a complicated word these days. Um, so that human SDR rep may not need to engage those leads anymore. There may be a future conversation, or the SDR agent itself is able to identify that, hey, this is a potential sales qualified lead with a and should be converted into an opportunity, and do it without that SDR human rep in place.
True, true.
So that's where I see the three kind of patterns lying.
Right. And I'm kind of interested, like, as you, looked at embarking on this journey from an implementation standpoint at, with the organization that you were working with. Um, what were the internal challenges? What was the internal dialogue in terms of how does one go about it, the business case, what were their own considerations, and maybe also skepticism around it?
Yeah, there's with generative AI, when we first started this, in early February, actually last November is when we started to engage with the SDR rep. There was definitely skepticism behind like what it's capable of doing. But at the same token, which was interesting is that you have others who are energized by it and, are somewhat clouded by the hype of what it can do, right? So, um, the human aspect of managing expectations is a massive challenge and to overcome at the beginning, right? So setting the right expectations and for the agent in terms of like how many leads are they converting over into an actual opportunity, right? How much engagement, how much time savings are we actually doing? So that became one of the challenges we had to face with. Another challenge is obviously the data challenge behind it, right? So our agents, we all know, love the saying, right? And I think it's ingrained in everyone's head. Our agents are only as powerful as the data that empowers them, right? So identifying those right data sets in order to support the agent to respond to customers, but also the leads that you're feeding into it, right? Some individuals, and we found the teams that leverage the leads
Mhm.
and incorporated the agent into its workflow. So what they would do is they would receive a lead, they would try to cold call them, and if the customer didn't pick up, they would assign them to the SDR agent to continue to nurture through email. Client wasn't available at that time. But they were leveraging the same quality leads that a normal rep would do, and we saw greater success there. Whereas another team decided to feed us lower quality leads, thinking the SDR agent can work, some magical um, conversion, and they were sending it lower quality leads. So identifying and aligning on the type of leads. Sorry, let me take a step back there. So they were signing at low quality leads, and what they were doing is just allowing the agent to reach out. Now we still had human in the loop to review the emails, but we saw lower adoption, and because those leads were of lesser quality, in my opinion, and weren't part of their normal workflow. So that becomes a challenge on aligning on how the agent is incorporated into the process as well. Your normal workflow process of your teams becomes another challenge to get alignment and agreement on. And then, of course, with the data, right? There's becomes a lot of great ideas, but identifying, unifying that data, knowing what's externally shareable, what's not, right? All of that takes work and time to do. So setting expectations, and the way to, in my opinion, to set your teams up for success is to start small. So instead of trying to leverage the SDR agent for all of your products at once, start with one or two products. Ensure it has the right data, the right structure around it. Leverage, data cloud and reg, and create those data libraries, file libraries, if need be, in order to give it the structure and the content it needs to operate without having to like boil the ocean, so to speak, right at the very beginning. Start small and then start scaling, but have a plan to scale and have an alignment on what metrics you need to hit in order to go from pilot into full out deployment and wide production usage.
Great. So if I recap this, a couple of things. One is, of course, there's the inherent skepticism, particularly around AI, given the sheer amount of hype in the marketplace today, unfortunately. And part of that was figuring out what kind of things would you want to measure, right? The business would like to understand that. And the related area that I heard, which I completely agree, is the underlying sort of data and the quality of data that's coming in. So if you are getting poor leads, yeah, it's not going to magically fix that. So you definitely want a higher quality data. And the third portion of this is, start small and then eventually sort of let it evolve as more as we build more confidence in the solution and as there is an internal level of comfort within the organization. Can you maybe talk a little bit about other challenges that may have existed around governance, security, things like that, consent?
Yeah. So the nice thing about with Agentforce, it automatically identifies that in the email it was generated through AI. So you have that transparency with your users. But you did mention security, governance, and it's very important to be aligned with your legal, security, and responsible AI teams along the way. So getting those practices set up and ways to engage in a quick turnaround time fashion is imperative to help you deliver quickly and have those quicker releases. What I found was establishing patterns, especially when it came to security and responsible AI, that will help speed up the process. So if I follow, for instance, this integration pattern or this security pattern, right, and it applies to this type of data or this type of scenario, do I have to go for approval every single release? Because as we've learned, as we've leveraged these agents, it's not your traditional delivery where you set it and then forget it. you have to monitor. It's essential to monitor these agents to understand how they're performing, what adjustments they need in order to have that higher resolution rate and create those efficiencies you're seeking. So yeah, it's extremely important to have those practices established. And I found that if you can align on patterns, that would help to speed up that review process and reduce risk for the organization.
That's great. Really interesting. It's also a good um, observation that I think I've seen with a lot of our customers as well, around just constant monitoring. Part of it, particularly in the early days, is the nature of generative AI. Like, I'm sure the LLM makers will tell you it's a feature that you can't predict the outcome 100%, and there's a little bit of variance. But I also think it's really important in the early days because you're still trying to formalize things around it. A lot of governance, a lot of guidance, a lot of thinking in larger organization is still evolving, right? We have somewhat of a knee-jerk reaction to how we want to do this, and then as you operationalize this in the next 6 months, a year and a half, uh, you're still kind of honing these guidance, these governance, these policies around it, and you'll probably initially see a lot more restrictive sort of policies, and they'll gradually open up and start accounting for the nature of the technology and the solution that we are dealing with. uh, any light that you want to throw on that aspect, the evolutionary nature of working with technology?
Yeah, like we're at such a critical time right now where we're all learning on how to leverage this technology, right? And we're learning new things every day, not only on how to configure the tech, but how to work with it and what's needed to support it, right? And that's why monitoring becomes so essential to these agentic solutions. Um, it's because you need to be able to adjust and adapt fairly quickly, right? A lot of vendors, being on the customer side, I heard from plenty of vendors, oh, our AI works, it doesn't hallucinate, things of that nature. And the reality is, like, forget it, put the hallucinations and things aside. If you just look at who the agent is interacting with, it's interacting with humans. So we bring our own vocabulary, our own experiences, our own thoughts to our engagement with an agent. So the way you and I may ask something may be different than someone else who may not have experience, for instance, in the Salesforce ecosystem when we're engaging with Salesforce's agent, help agent, right? We may ask it in a particular way. Um, so it's very imperative um, to have this monitoring in place to be able to understand how your users are communicating, what language are they using, in order to achieve the outcomes you're looking to achieve. Otherwise, like in the case of like the service agents, they're just going to result in either a frustrated customer or an escalation to a human agent, which doesn't get the goal you were trying to achieve.
True, really well said. I'm very glad that you mentioned this. So, this is a good segue for the next portion of our conversation. I know you've had first-hand experience on both sides with Agent Force and Data Cloud, and I know a lot of organizations are looking at it or even going through an implementation right now. Curious to hear your perspective on it. Things that work really well, areas of challenge, and how you address them. Just a candid conversation on
Yeah.
stories from the trenches.
Yeah, no. So, like, we started leveraging, or my experience with the Agent Force technology was an earlier adopter of it. So we went through some of the growing pains you would with any new technology. And that also came with a lot of new learnings along the way. But especially with the Salesforce technology with Agent Force and Data Cloud, I've seen how they've developed products in order to fill some of those gaps. With Command Center and monitoring with Interaction Explorer, um, that helps you to monitor. With Einstein suggested improvements, it helps you to ensure that your instruction, classification descriptions, and scope are accurate and aligned to the topic at hand. And those were some of the challenges that we faced earlier on. You need to let an agent know what its role is, what task it's supposed to perform, and how to operate. Um, and that was some of the learnings along the way. Another learning is don't necessarily, especially if you're piloting, wait for that perfect long-term solution. And that's something we learned along the way. So for instance, with the SDR agent, while we wanted all this, curated, nice content, and integrating it from a separate system that was being leveraged to create that content, instead of having that integration right off the bat, start slow, export those into files, and create a data library specific for your agent to leverage at the get-go. Don't wait for that. Um, Another challenge or thing to be aware of is obviously the security aspect of it. So what access should a agent have? What data and objects and visibility, or FSL, or field level security, should an agent have to your underlying structures? And that's important to understand as well, so that it evidently doesn't expose information it shouldn't be, or updating information that it shouldn't be. So ensuring that you get the security model in place is imperative, and ensuring to reduce risk for an organization. From a organizational perspective or delivery perspective, I would say it's extremely important to um, size your data team to match your agent teams. The reason why I say that is because your data team can become a bottleneck because they have various requests from various sources coming through. So they could become a quick bottleneck in order for you to empower those, more impactful, or, lack of a better word, attractive use cases, right? So that's where I would say is security is a big thing, making sure the agent has the right access and you don't expose the wrong data. Similar to the theme before, start small, but don't wait for that perfect integrated solution when you can leverage some of the internal features already within Data Cloud, and then size your teams accordingly. That's extremely important, in my opinion, in order to ensure that consistent and continuous delivery on the platform.
Okay, that does make quite a bit of sense. Yeah, I think I've had a very similar experience. Some of our customers who use GPT-5, very sort of same thing. Obviously, security. Again, you want to set this whole thing so that your prompts, your agents are working in context of a profile, a permission set, like all the things that the platform offers out of the box.
Yeah.
And which is I'm so glad that we have a ton of those capabilities to be super granular with what field on what object and what kind of records does AI have access to, because that's like the number one way to kill AI adoption in an enterprise is to slip on that one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
The last thing you want is legal or security knocking on your door saying, agent's doing something it's not supposed to.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can you also talk about data cloud in general? And because the way I see it, data cloud is solving two different use cases. One is the whole identity resolution, the party, the individual object, the kind of marketing slash CDP type use case, right? And the other is its ability to now pull data from disparate sources for consumption for AI. And I know Salesforce has done a lot of work, and there was some big announcements last week. So curious how you're seeing the evolution of product. What were your experiences with it?
Yeah, so with the unified profile, um, it's very important to understand what how data cloud can support you there. Some customers may look at it as an MDM solution, which it's not really. It has some of the functionality, so that's a clear distinction of where I found that we started to look at it in that fashion, and really it didn't solve the MDM component of it, but allowed us to unify that customer, where we were able to, through the matching rules um, and things of that nature, and bring it in to create that unified individual. Um, so with data cloud, I think that's imperative, especially when pulling from different sources. Now, one great thing about it is that your systems probably already have like foreign keys inside of them. So linking them within data cloud should be fairly straightforward to do so. Now, you mentioned something that was great, which was the zero copy. Now, zero copy is extremely advantageous, especially to get started for organizations, such as the previous organization we were at. We leveraged had a lot of data in Snowflake that was cleansed data that we leveraged for reporting. Now, that's quality data that we could leverage and start leveraging right out the gate. So through zero copy and creating DMO objects and bringing in that data, we're able to leverage it for our agents in a quicker time fashion. Um, but the other thing I love about it is the fact that even though I came from the integration space originally, you don't have to create those additional integrations, right? So let's say a bad batch went through in an integration into Snowflake. You don't have to worry about updating that data in Data Cloud anymore. As you cleanse it in Snowflake, it will be replicated or accessible via Data Cloud through zero copy. Now, one thing I would say is to um, ensure that you understand your consumption and how those are going to work. Um, we all know if you've been in consulting when work, or even just in IT in general, if you ask a business, do you need it real time? They'll always say yes, right? Like I need it like as soon as the user clicks enter, I want to see that reflected. But the reality is a lot of the systems in the back end aren't real time. So ensure you have um, the right mechanisms in place. So for instance, if you're running a calculated insight, right, you don't need a streaming insight if one of your or a couple of your underlying attributes come in a batch function, right, that determine the action. But that's another beauty thing about Agentforce and Data Cloud that I just wanted to touch upon. Because as we were starting these journeys, folks started to approach me with ideas saying, "Hey, why don't you create a headless agent that looks for these attributes, and if they match, then you know, um, you know, trigger a process off." I'm like, that's a great idea, but I can achieve that through a calculated insight in a much cost efficient manner to do so. So I think they're within generative AI. And as you go through this, I know I'm kind of jumping here, um, but as you go through generative AI, it's very important as use cases come in to determine, is it a general AI use case? Is it an automation use case? Or is it a calculated insight flash trigger type use case? Um, to decipher like what is the best path forward in order to enable your business.
That's a really good distinction. And I'm glad you mentioned Snowflake, right? Because I think I almost every large customer I have has that dilemma, right? They have invested in the last 5 6 years into a lot of data infrastructure with Snowflake, Databricks. They may have Redshift, right, or Microsoft Fabric, or any of these other technologies, Google Spanner. So you have a bunch of these things that already exist. There is a bit of investment done there, fair bit of,
Yeah.
and there's all these processes. They've attained some degree of good, high quality data, right? And they're always, this is a question I see a lot that comes up. GPT-5 works with or without data cloud. So we are okay, in those conversations. But the customer is always going, well, I just, spent millions of dollars in the last few years building this, data infrastructure. So where does data cloud fit in, and why do I need it or do I not need it? Since you mentioned that, in the environment you work, there was Snowflake. Did this come up, and what's really a good way to think about it?
Yeah. So um, I think when it comes to agents, it did arise with us, but less so because we had different engineering organizations developing um, solutions leveraging GPT and Snowflake and our other internal systems. So on the Salesforce side, when it came to data cloud, the cost did come into play. Now, Salesforce has done some things to address this, where, for instance, I believe it was mid-August. Now, your CRM structured data, you don't get charged for in Data Cloud, which is a massive, improvement for customers, in my opinion. Um, Now, most customers probably are ingesting this very same data in Snowflake, right, and paying for it. Now, it's so that's where it becomes a little bit more interesting. But I find like with Salesforce announcement of partnership with OpenAI and making CRM data accessible and things of that nature, with the now like release and of MCP servers and things of that nature, these systems that kind of were siloed in the past, each of these vendors are now realizing we can't exist on our own. So they're making mechanisms on how to leverage each other, right? And leverage that data, and share, like, to create those seamless processes to enable that agentic experience. And in the future, that transformational experience where it can operate and communicate with each other. Agents can communicate with each other and go about it in that form. We didn't get my team didn't get time to implement it before parting ways with my last employer, but we were looking at that very fact where we were looking at the seismic MCP server to see how we can leverage it with Agentforce in order to have that two-way interaction to create that curated content.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that too. In fact, our upcoming release will have support for agent to agent or A2A protocol, because I think interoperability is going to be so key. It's like we now have AI, but we need to still think so much from that microservices and service oriented architecture mentality of how does my Salesforce data and information in Snowflake and information in SAP or whatever other large enterprise systems I may have, how does all of that play together? But just the other day we were talking with Vasu, and he mentioned this too. It is not a winner takes all environment from an end customer's perspective. They will have a multitude of technologies from a multitude of vendors because they're already invested with them, right? Your environment may have Salesforce, SAP, NetSuite, Workday, a lot of other technologies, IBM, Oracle, right? The big ones, Microsoft. So when you have all of these, you want a technology leader wants to make sure that the business and their investment in all of these platforms, they're able to benefit from it, and these can play with each other nicely in the agentic world. Um, any
Uh,
thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is not a new evolution of this. That's why middleware tools like MuleSoft and Informatica were created, right? It's to enable that interoperability between systems. Now, with the rise of generative AI and agentic solutions, um, now it's not about just transferring data, but performing actions with each other. And this is where I see what is going to be interesting to see actually is that, and I think in your conversation with Vasu, you mentioned it. It's as well. It's it's not necessarily a technology issue. It's a business issue and a business strategy and transformation issue. So it's going to be interesting to see how teams and organizations operate in the future, because you can no longer kind of be siloed. You need to understand what the other team is capable of doing, and how you can work together versus just a handoff process, right? What can be that back and forth that could, that may not have existed in the past, that now can, without tying up more of, you know, your human resources time.
True, true. Very well put. I am quite curious about the implementation itself. Can you maybe talk about a breakup of the timelines? How long did it take, particularly in requirement gathering and the implementation itself, fine tuning it, deploying? If you can talk some range, give a sense to our viewers also of what to expect.
Yeah, so implementation wise, it really varies on use case, to be honest with you. So your approach matters. Those more attractive use cases do take a longer amount of time, but delivery is not in the 2 week fashion that some claims have been made. Like, I can develop an agent today and deploy it into production tonight. That doesn't happen. Not without significant risks attributed to it, right? So what I would find is, if, from an implementation standpoint, definitely you need to deliver in an agile type fashion. We experimented with what we call the factory model, which was more aligned to a waterfall model, but you didn't really get the velocity you were looking for. With these agents, you need to tweak on the go. So to have your product owner, your business analyst, your engineers, your developers all working, your business all working together and tweaking, that will help accelerate velocity. So I would say align more towards that. Now, when it comes to road mapping, I would say in order to set your team up for success and planning, um, still have that planning stage, not to plan out the entire engagement, but start to plan out some of those high level use cases that you want to target, and start leveraging like uh, uh, prioritization efforts such as like, or methodologies such as RICE, right? Like reach, impact, confidence, effort. And what I like to add on is the D for data. What is your data readiness there, right? This will allow you to then plan with your data teams as well, if you're using Data Cloud, to say, okay, how much leeway do we need in order to get Data Cloud stood up? How much leeway do we need in order to get the data that we need in order to power this more attractive use case? In the meantime, are there smaller use cases that allow us to create improvements, revenue opportunities, whatever have you, that are lower lift, that allow us to start to extract return on our investment earlier on without waiting for that large use case? So I did write a article on how to get started with this and how to think about it. And when I thought about it, what our leaders are asking us to do is to save time and give back time to our teams so they can do what they do best. They do proactive outreach, engage in more customer conversations, and sell more product or service, right? So it comes down to a time savings. So when I looked at something like case summaries, it's a very low lift, lightweight lift where you can have that out and running within a week, for instance, right? That generally gets you towards your goal, accelerates to your goal in a quick time fashion. So what I mean by that is, I read something on LinkedIn, can't take credit for it, is if you take, say, 5 hours for a resource per week, that equates to giving them back 1 month of time a year. So I use that 5 hours a week number. Now, when you do case summaries, it adds, it may be 2 minutes a case, but how many cases are each rep working each week? That will probably get you close to 50% of your goal of time savings just by doing that 1 week implementation.
True.
On the other hand, those larger use cases that we took, it took longer amounts of time, sometimes 2 months, in order just to align and get the data right, to get the information and the agent to provide the insight to a rep that they were looking for. So it all depends on the use case in terms of your timeline. But what I would, sorry, I know I've been speaking for a while, but just to like summarize it quickly, I would say start by planning. Start off with short wins in order to give some breathing room and enable your other teams to catch up and get the foundation in place that they need to, and then start to work and then deliver together. But this way, you can set expectations, you can achieve ROI quickly, start to achieve ROI in a quicker time frame, I should say, and still work towards those more impactful use cases that you're targeting.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned this, and thank you for kind of qualifying the durations a little bit. Can you maybe at a very high level talk about the phases, if you will, right? Like there's a bit of setup that you have to do initially. There's probably some requirements, some consensus building internally, some configuration connecting with data sources. And again, we can take a simpler example, or a more complex one. Uh, if you assume data was inside Salesforce, or if you were pulling from external sources, maybe a breakdown of various phases would be very useful, because I do think that a lot of people are trying to really understand what it takes, and you have such a interesting perspective to bring that.
Yeah. No, so I think right at the get-go, it's an ideation phase with alongside the business and your implementation team to start to ideate ideas on how to leverage AI within their processes. But not only an ideation phase there, start to identify what are they struggling with, right? In terms of what SLT is looking for. Is it too many clicks? Like, I don't want to create an opportunity. It's too many clicks for me, right? Is that something an agent can work with, right? So start the first phase by identifying, then prioritizing your use cases. Once you get into there, then you're more in an agile fashion, right? So you're working with your teams to do sprint planning and estimates and things of that nature. And that's where you get into the build aspect of it, right? With Agent Force, it's very descriptive. So it's not like you're building out, like you need to have time to write out your user stories, make sure, your qualification or acceptance criteria is written out accordingly. But as you're doing that, you can also be building at the same time with these agents and start to build them. So that's where your build phase comes in. Um, and then you migrate into that test area where user acceptance testing comes in. Now there is where you want to be able to have your engineering team working with your testing team as well, to be able to adjust accordingly and retest a change as in a quick fashion, right? It could be as simple as adjusting a prompt, right, or whatnot. But that's very important. And then obviously you deploy. But we mentioned it throughout. It's that monitor phase that matters the most, in my opinion, right? So while build and test could be fairly, accelerated, especially with testing tools out there like Testing Center now, where you can automate it. Um, the monitoring phase becomes extremely important because you don't know how your users are going to engage your agent. Are they going to ask the question the same way you think they would? Now, UAT and things of that nature can capture some of it, but um, you really need to monitor and have, in my opinion, have that next phase to like um, after monitor to improve and tweak the agent is necessary. So plan for that as well, right? because you will learn things as you move along, right? Especially when it comes to testing, you may be, for instance, testing one specific scenario at a time, but a user may ask you three of those scenarios at once. So is your agent be able to go about it? Or is it able to, like, is it capturing what was last said in the last, 5 messages with memory, and applying that to its logic, things of that nature. You learn as you go along. So it's your normal delivery cycle, but it's adding that monitor phase as well as time to adjust and iterate on that agent, and that has to be baked into your plan.
Okay. So, which of these phases would you say was the longest, in your implementation? If you could just talk maybe a little bit more about
Yeah,
that.
so I think the monitor and iterate phase takes a little bit of time, um, because you have so many different users interacting with your agents that you need to understand why is it taking certain actions and going down a certain route. Why is it interpreting it the way it needs to, it is doing, and you learn lessons learned like that. So that monitor and iterative phase is extremely important. Now, in a perfect world scenario, that iterative phase goes away, right? You got it right the first time. But the reality is, right, regardless of whether it's agentic AI or traditional delivery, you learn things, or things that are unexpected come along the way. So I think that monitoring and that uh, there is takes a lot of time. But when it now, I'm speaking specifically when the data is cleansed and within the CRM. Now, when you're leveraging data cloud or other sources of data, that's where a lot of time comes into play, because identifying the right source of data, um, that takes quite a bit of time, to ensure that you're bringing in the right data, that it's the permissions are correct, and what the agent should access are correct, from a security perspective. But that's where some additional time will get taken. So that's why those, like, smaller use cases up front and then sprinkling them throughout buys you some time for your data teams, your integration teams, in order to get the bandwidth to get you the foundation you need to deliver your use case.
Great point. So, in terms of the range, I guess, if you were using data that's internal to Salesforce versus bringing it from outside, like how significant of a difference is that? And I know it's a very it depends question, but just from a range perspective.
I think bringing external data, almost like multiplies it like 2 times at least, to bring it in terms of your delivery. So that's where, like, that's stagnated. Now, in our delivery, our data team set separate from our agentic team. So perhaps incorporating the data team as part of the agentic team, in that Scrum delivery would help with that. Um, but I do feel that breathing room, or that pathway is needed there for them. So it could be anywhere from 2 times to whatnot. But you do mention, you did remind me of something. The two teams shouldn't be operating separately. You need to, like, continuously interact with each other. So what I mean by that is the data team may be told, hey, this is the type of data I need, go out and find it for me, right? And find where I can get that quality data. And they go out and they find that data for you. Now, before they start even to ingest that data into Data Cloud or even think about it, it's good for the agentic team and the business to align us. Is this the right data set that we want to leverage? Right? Because you don't know what data set your user is leveraging. There could be a delay in the source you're using versus the one they're using, and then that leads to a mistrust, not only in your data but in the agent itself.
True. Well, I know we've kind of gone on this for some time here. There is a question in comments from Sridhar, and he's asking about how they can implement Agent Force into public sector agencies to determine the case assignment based on case description. I'm going to let you respond.
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes to uh, regulated industries, it's a you need to be extremely careful, right? I love that use case of leveraging, AI in order to like help with that case intake, routing, and things of that nature, structuring that data, simplifying it for your users while giving you the structure you need in the back end in order to like uh, service that need. Um, Now, one thing to call out is, and I'm not a security expert at Salesforce. I'm not speaking on Salesforce, like not on behalf of Salesforce, but so with Agent Force, they're not obfuscating the PII data when leveraged within an agent when sending it to your LLM, right? In order to do so. So there's a security aspect potentially there that, for instance, that may be specific to your organization, right? With prompt templates, they are. So if you leverage prompt templates, they obfuscate PI data before leveraging the LLM. However, on the Agentforce platform itself, it is not doing that. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing these types of ingestion. So if it's in a description, you might be a little bit safer as they may not be using company names or credit card information, but you need to be really careful on how you go about that, in my opinion.
Great. This is very interesting, and thank you for addressing that. I certainly see security as a pretty huge area, particularly for PubSec customers. We've worked with a few, we've talked to some of them, and it's definitely a really, really top priority. And then anybody in regulated sector, of course, and outside as well. Great. I think this has been a very fruitful and interesting conversation. I hope folks got an opportunity to learn from you as much as I did. Uh, any closing thoughts, Al, before we exit here?
Well, before I give my closing thought, I just want to say thank you. It's been a great conversation, and I really enjoy all your LinkedIn events. To be honest, I've been tuning in, and they've been really engaging. Um, One thing I would say is, as a final closing thought, is we're entering a new period where generative AI is changing how we work. Um, but we are early in its creation. So we're learning as we go along the way. So it's imperative to solve for use cases that are you're able to today while setting up to be able to scale in the future. So be very predictive and tactical or intentful for the use cases you choose on your agentic journey.
True. I would agree. I think this came up the other day also. The time to value, right? Like every organization today is they've heard the hype. AI is going to make do all this magic for them, and we've been hearing that for 12 to 18 months now. I think if you are in internal IT, if you are in business trying to drive change like this, I think time to value is so important, right? You want that value to drive adoption further, investments further, data related activities further. And I think businesses are increasingly less patient about long term, like take a 2 year view of this, and they're like, what can I get in this month, this quarter, right? Next quarter, how fast do we bring AI to bear on the promises that we keep on hearing? And thank you for the for the comment. I'm glad that you found it useful, Al, and this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Take
Have
care.
a good day. Take care. Bye.